Well, welcome back to the workshop. We are going to do some work on the GB again today. We are going to join the wings together, which involves mixing up some epoxy, and we're going to take care of control horns and control rods and see what's what. See if we can get this wing put together. See how far we can get today. And with that, let's just get right into it. Alright, so we encountered a problem installing the second one on the left wing. The servo was not centering properly, so I went ahead and replaced that servo. I had another HS300, fortunately, in my stash, and replaced it, and it was working just fine now. Now, that servo may be just fine, and it may be because my testing battery is a little bit low on voltage. It is, after all, 4.8 volt, which is the minimum, and that's at the normal charge of that battery. So I'll just do some extensive testing, and I'll label it from there and see what's what. So let's go back into the spar and see if the glue is dried. All right, so I wanted to show you guys this tool that I'm using. It's from Great Plains. I've had it for years. It's a Z-bend maker. If you don't have one of these, you really should pick it up because it makes your life a lot easier. You can do the other bend. Let me get my tool here. So I've seen people do the method where they bend once and then bend again, and sometimes, that'll work. You just clip that part, and then some people I see, they also twist it to get their Z-bend, but it's not exactly perfect. And so with the Z-bend tool, you just make a mark where you want, and then on this tooth right there, you can just put it in, and it gives you exactly where you need it to be, and then you can straighten it out from there. It's a much smaller bend, and it's more precise than the other one, so I prefer to use it whenever I can. It's just my personal preference. You can agree to disagree, but there you go. Thought I'd share that tool with you. Well, being the builder that I am, I went to the next step. The glue is not yet dry on the spar, so I want to let it cure a little bit longer. So I went on to plan my next steps, and being the builder that I am, I put all of this together with hardware that I had on hand. Silly me. Great Plains, I forgot. They're a great company. I'm such a silly guy. Anyway, there are lots and lots of pieces of hardware here, and I will use them moving forward. No big deal. But let's get on to installing these landing gear. Alright guys, so here we are. I got the main spar. The glue is all dry, and I prefer to use Titebond too because it dries pretty quickly, and it's going to hold just as strong as epoxy, as much as epoxy needs to be. One thing I also did was I took some 100 grit sandpaper and sort of, well, I sanded it down. Just helps it slip into the pocket easier. And so now it's time to mix up some epoxy, and we're going to install this per the instructions. We're going to smear epoxy on the inside of the pocket. We're going to smear epoxy on the root of the ribs. We're also going to smear it onto the spar itself. So let's mix some epoxy and get it put together, and I'll show you what I do to jig the wings as the epoxy cures.
Somewhere close to harmony, when the world is sound asleep, something's gonna bring the change. Journeys we are meant to take, something at the edge of space, calling us to fly away. Don't you be afraid, everything will change. You and I, jumping off the edge, they say dreamers never die. So come and fly, come and fly, come and fly away with me. We're rising, we're falling, we're making moves. We're climbing, we're soaring, 1,000 views. We're rising, we're falling, we're making moves. We're climbing, we're soaring, 1,000 views. Come and fly away, come and fly away, come and fly away with me. Come and fly away, come and fly away, come and fly away with me.
All right, so I've got the wing down on the floor, and I'm gonna maybe get that now. I like to keep a clamp right on the nose because that's going to slot into the fuselage. So I want to make sure that that is nice and tight together and cures well. This is 60-minute epoxy, which means 60 minutes working time, but really it takes about 24 hours for this to fully cure. And you probably saw it, maybe you didn't see, but I did spill a little bit of epoxy on the wing that I cleaned up. Isopropyl alcohol, IPA, and that's what you want to do for cleaning up. Make sure you have paper towels on hand, and you can wipe down the surface, and anything will come up with, as long as it's not cured. Now, to set my wing dihedral, I used a piece of foam board, just masking tape to the tip of the wing, and yeah, we're going to let this cure. Let's move on to something else. But before I do, I'm going to show you a little trick that I do. So how do you know when the epoxy is cured and when it's safe to move? I leave the little bit of extra out. I don't throw it away. The reason I do is that it's going to become a solid in the container. And when it is solid, I can just pull it straight out of the cup, and that way I can reuse my cup. And that's why I use this little plastic cup. I've used it so many times now. And I'm using little half a paint stick here. When I mix, I use paint sticks from the hardware store. Here's another section. And as I mix and use epoxy, if I'm not getting it all over the stick, then I just cut off the end of the stick and keep using it until it's gone. A little bit of frugality. All right, so let's move on to something else. All right, so I looked over the instructions, and there's not a whole lot I can do. It talks about installing the engine and whatnot next, and it doesn't really want me putting on the rudder until the end. And I can't really put on the landing gear yet because the wing is still curing. So I did look in the box for additional parts for moving on, and these ply formers for mounting the cowl, they're broken. So I'm going to use some medium CA, and man, I don't know. I've still got a little bit of epoxy left. Maybe I'll use some epoxy, and I'm going to put these back together, and since they're kind of warped, I'm gonna try to get them flat for a while and let them sit and see if they recover. If not, that's not a big deal. The instructions allow me to draw a line, a reference line for where these need to go. So I'm not too terribly worried about them getting perfectly flat, but I definitely need to make this repair. So I'm going to do that. Alright, so I ended up just using some medium CA since I'm going to have to either CA or epoxy these into the cowl itself. I'm not too terribly worried about it. Anyway, sandbags. Always have sandbags. This is just play sand, and I've got it double Ziploc bagged, and it comes in great handy for this kind of thing, weighing things down. If you're sheeting fuselage or sheeting a wing, this is also great to just get some weight that'll conform to whatever surface that you're using. Super easy, super simple, and so we're just going to let that sit. Alright guys, so that's it for today. That's really all I can do until this epoxy cures out. And in the meantime, I'm going to be looking over the instructions to see what else I need to do and make a game plan for what is going to happen next. There are some things that I may not understand, so it's always important to, number one, go through your instructions at the beginning of a build, but also to go through the instructions as you're building to make sure that you understand, have a game plan, have your supplies, so you don't get into the middle of something and realize you don't have a part, you don't have epoxy, you don't have glue, you don't have whatever you need. Alright, so that's what I'm going to do, and I think we've made some good progress today. It's only an hour or so in the shop, so we got some more flying work of art in progress, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. We'll talk to you later.